So welcome, Jimmy. Thank you for joining us for this session's conversation. Where I'd like to start is we've got a question of what is the Rotary Club doing to help communities around the world? So maybe we can start, Jimmy, by learning a little bit more about what is the Rotary and what's its mission before we find out what it's doing to help communities around the world.
Well, Rotary's mission is in fact, they brought out a vision statement last year. Together, we see the world where people, and I'm emphasising the fact together and people, unite and take action to create lasting change around the globe, in our communities, and most of all in ourselves. And that's the mission. Now, for us to do that, you might say, what do you mean that's the mission? Well, we have a motto where it's service above self, where we try and provide service to the community, whether it's local, national, or international. And the fact that we're doing that prior to ourselves, then that's our aim. I hope that answers your question.
It does, Jimmy. And I'm curious because you mentioned it's about service above self to community, whether that be local, national, or international. So, I mean, what is the impact that the Rotary has at a local, national, and international level?
Well, it's quite strange. We, in many cases, we'll do a community assessment. In other words, we will ask the people in and around the community, or we will ask the local Rotarians if they're aware of a need within the community. And it could be something as simple as an after-school club in the primary school where they're teaching the youngsters to play netball and they're needing some equipment. Or it could be the company section of a boys' brigade where they're wanting some equipment that teaches them about teamwork, team building, collaboration. It could be an individual family who have gone through a loss. And I can use an example of a group that we supported in the past, the Emma Cameron Foundation, where the mother, the father, and there were the two daughters. The mother took a rare cancer. The family were supported by Macmillan nurses. And of course, the mother passed away. 18 months later, the youngest daughter had the exact same rare cancer. But because she was below the age of 10, there was no real support network. So the father and the remaining daughter set up the Emma Cameron Foundation. And it might be something as simple as getting a wig when their hair falls out because of the chemotherapy. And that's where it all started. And then they realised that they could actually become a beacon for everybody else to look at and come to, because you've got the Teenage Cancer Trust, you've got the likes of Macmillan, but there was nothing for really young people. And of course, when she passed away, then that became the foundation. So it felt time in the past. Locally in our community, we've got the Marie Curie Centre. And in fact, one of our members is the bed manager up there. So we've supported them in the past with many activities. We will arrange fundraising activities. And you'll notice I use the word fundraising because there's a lot of fun in what we try to do. And we engage all the families. We try and get people involved in every which way. If we don't have deep pockets, it's not a case of we're putting our hands in our pockets and handing money out. What we do have is we have networks and we have individuals who have a particular skill at organising a golf event or organising a race night or organising a dinner dance. And they'll contact either their clients or customers and ask them to take tables and support the event. So we do that in collaboration with whoever it is we're working with. Nationally, well, there was the Prince and Princess of Wales, or internationally, there's Shelter Box, Aqua Box, Disaster Aid, where these are big cartons, big plastic boxes that contain equipment or filters or pumps or tents that go into areas that have been hit with a disaster. And they cost anything from, well, a family water filtration pump costs about £25, and that goes into the household. And it doesn't matter if they've been in a flood, yourself that you've got all the water, all the sewage, everything in it, but they can use this water filter and it decontaminates it, takes all that brackish waste sewage water and turns it into clean drinking water, because they've got certain facilities within the pumps. And these have been engineered and designed by Rotarians. In fact, many of the box charities started with local Rotarians trying to do something in another part of the world. And now what they've got is they've got deposits all around the globe where if there's a disaster, then they can contact them. And in many cases, they're the first responders, and they'll go in and assess what the damage is and then put out a call to action. And because Rotary is global, then that's what we strive to do. We try and respond.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, what you just said there, that in many cases when it comes to disasters, the Rotarians can be some of the first responders in the area, leveraging the power of their network to see how they can provide assistance. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that we were talking previously and you mentioned DNA, which was, I think, the disaster network assistance program. So I'd really like to understand more that in the event of increasing climate changes and floods and fires, how Rotarians are helping local communities all around the world to respond to these disasters.
It's quite strange. I remember in my business life, about 8 or 10 years ago, I went to a resilience conference through in Edinburgh, where they were talking about businesses being ready if the premises had a fire or burnt out, and how they could continue to operate when, if they take everything and put it into the cloud, or they have a copy of all of the materials saved up to date off site. And I immediately looked at what we do in Rotary, and that's exactly what the DNA rag strives to do. We've got 3 elements now. It's called the DNA rag because it is the Disaster Network of Assistance, but it's a Rotary action group. And there's Rotary action groups. There's about 40 different types. There's water and sanitation. There's the environmental action group. There's the environment. I said environment. Who else? Do you know there's 40? And I can't get them into my head. Anyway, the DNA, what we try and do is we'll try and prepare. We've got preparation packs to help people, Rotarians, groups around the world, to share in their community how to prepare before a disaster. The elements that they can actually have in place should a disaster befall them, whether it's a volcanic eruption, a hurricane, a typhoon. The annual one is the rainfall in Bangladesh. Every year you've got the monsoon period. So they know they're going to get flooded out. So these are predictable disasters. Earthquakes aren't so predictable, although they happen quite regularly in Nepal and Haiti and places like that. So you can be prepared. Then, of course, that's before the event. During the event, then Rotarians pass that data and information on. Big problem there is if an area is being struck with a disaster, then communication becomes an issue, because the likes of the Japanese tsunami, when the power stations went, it took out everything, all of the communications. There was no landlines, no electricity, no clean water. And it took us a couple of days to find out via other methods to get information about what was needed. So you got before, you got during, and then after. It's not a quick fix. So the Rotary Action Group is there for recovery, and the recovery could be the likes of the Katrina hurricane, the New Orleans. It flooded that and it was months, maybe 18 months, 2 years before they even started to try and get on top of it, because there was so much damage, so much water that they had to, let just drain out. Many of the problems, they happen because we have moved forward as not as a nation, but as a human race. We wanted to feed the population, so they took away all the forests and all the hedgerows, and they had big fields going for miles, brought in combine harvesters that could just drive across hectares and hectares and hectares of wheat. But then a strong wind would come in, lift all the topsoil off, and you ended up with a dust bowl eventually. And that way there was no arable land. And now they're beginning to put hedgerows back in to break up, the wind currents. They're beginning to put in copses of trees again, to regenerate. And that's the type of thing. So there's the before, the during, and the after. And there's multitudes. If you've got a particular passion within Rotary, then you could probably get an action group started. That was a long answer for a short question.
Well, I think what was interesting is you kind of blended into the next question that I wanted to ask you, which was about the power of education in helping at-risk countries. And I think what you're saying is when it comes to disaster relief, we need to think about before, during, and after. It's no good just going in at the beginning and then not providing any support. It's almost like short, medium, and long term. So it's kind of thinking about things with a far longer timeline of what's going to be needed, like your example there with the hurricane and the water. If the water is going to be there and it's going to take 3 weeks for the water to drain after a flood, how do you manage and help the people until that time's gone? And then how do you then start building up the soil and the land, and recognizing that there's very much an ecosystemic approach in what you're talking about, and how the Rotary kind of steps in and provides this support. So where I'm curious is, what we're seeing is more and more countries are at risk of disaster. So how can we all better prepare ourselves for the event of any form of disaster that might happen?
Well, obviously I've got the privilege here of speaking about Rotary, but there are other organisations who do similar work, and that similar work is done in collaboration with many partners. I mentioned quite a few of the box charities, which people do, but when it comes to, let me think, when it comes to engaging everybody else, I think the idea of being involved in the Rotary family is probably the best way that you could be educated. Now that sounds as if I'm putting in a plug there for everybody to join Rotary, but what we strive to do is we try and alert young people in primary through the Rota Kids programme, that's for 7 to 11-year-olds. We try and alert them to things that happen locally. There are youngsters in their local community don't get a gift at Christmas. Cash for Kids is a perfect example. Radio Clyde, they gather funds to give gifts. So we've got the shoebox appeal that goes in, to primary schools, and they can put items in there that they believe a youngster, in their community would like. That's a local event that they can get involved in. Their international event is the exact same. It's a shoebox appeal, and they might go to an orphanage in Romania or a village in Africa or somewhere in India where the youngsters, get gifts from kids in Glasgow or in Canada or Australia. It doesn't matter, but that whole element. The idea of educating the youngsters about the impact of a disaster, it's not just happening to an adult on the TV that you see in the news article. It's happening to families. So the fact that it's happening to families, we try and call on families to be involved. We've got Interact, which is for the 12 to 17-year-olds, and they do the exact same shoebox appeal, or they can do a fashion show, because in schools you'll find there's a diverse population of youngsters from different parts of the world. And for them to put on their cultural costume and do a wee fashion show in the evening and bring in parents and raise money that way, it's fascinating. It breaks down barriers. And that's what we're trying to do with regards to inclusion. The older ones, when they leave school and either go into an apprenticeship or work in the local Tesco or Asda, and there are many other superstores out there, or even if they go into college or university, you've got Rotaract, which is the 18 to 30-ish. Now, I'm saying 30-ish because there are some Rotarians who are still there at 32, 33, 34, because they want, that's their cohort of people that they know. But a Rotaractor at 18 plus is seen as a Rotarian, so they can be a Rotarian right up to the day they pass. And that means that they know that what they're trying to do is make a difference. But it's in making that difference they can decide how they want to make it. And the great thing is that for the youngsters coming up through the last year or two of secondary school or going into university, Rotary has probably one of the largest education programs in the globe. You can do a student exchange where you're in one, you could be in Germany or Austria and do an exchange to Canada, where you spend anything from 3 weeks to 6 months to a whole year learning your final year in another country. And you can host somebody the following year in a reciprocal. Doesn't have to be, but in a reciprocal arrangement. That same thing happens when you get to the end of your ordinary bachelor's degree. If you want to go on and do a master's degree, Rotary will enable you to go on, and you'll get funding from Rotary if your master's degree fits one of the 7 areas of focus of the Rotary Foundation, which is the Rotary charity. And the 7 areas of focus are basic education and literacy, the environment, which was the newest one added in last year, water and sanitation that I already mentioned, maternal and child health, the amount of mothers that die in childbirth, or the amount of children that die they're either stillborn or just after they're born, is phenomenal. Disease treatment and prevention, and I'm going to mention polio in a second. Economic and community development, peace building and conflict prevention. And virtually every one of these that I've mentioned, of these 7, have got action groups, just like the DNA RAG. Now, I said when I mentioned disease treatment and prevention, polio, Johannes Salt came up with a vaccine in the late 70s. And because Rotary invited them to the Philippines, they inoculated a group in the Philippines, something like 100,000 youngsters. In 1985, because it was such a success, the Rotarians around the globe at their international convention promised the children of the world that they would eradicate polio. There were 1,000 cases a day in 1985. And for those that are good at maths, that's 365,000 cases a year. Last year, before the pandemic, there were 17. And that was in just 2 countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, because of the conflict. It's sprung up a wee bit more, but there's a global polio eradication initiative set up with the UN, the World Health Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the CDC, and of course Rotary at the core. And that global polio eradication initiative transferred that whole infrastructure into tackling COVID-19, and is still doing so. They use the same monitoring techniques. They still track and trace everything that they've done, to nail polio is now being done for COVID-19. And I can make a small cartoon, it lasts about 90 seconds. I can make that available to you, Tabitha Jane, in an email, and it can be circulated. but it's very, very good. It shows how, you know, the COVID-19 is benefiting, oh sorry, the tackling of COVID-19 is benefiting from the polio initiative that's in place.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really fascinating. I think it's quite eye-opening for me in terms of really realizing the breadth and depth of the network that Rotary has and the work that it's doing, you know, when you're talking about how the impact that it has at school level for the 7 to 11s all the way up, and then how this program that you've been supporting with polio has then been able to be used to help actually work or function with COVID-19 and help support that. So what I'd like to
Which
do
was
is
a global disaster.
Yes. Yeah. What I'd like to do is I'd like to open it up to the floor and see if there's any questions that people have for Jimmy.
Yeah, I actually would be interested in knowing, like, so as you're doing like disaster risk or like aid and like a bit of risk reduction, pretty much, how much are you working together, or to what extent, I guess, are you working together with local communities on those issues?
Well, what you find is that you'll find, when I say action groups, you'll find local activists. You will contact Rotary and say, we want to do this program in the community, or we want to send this support material to somewhere in Africa or whatever. I mean, I got asked by a Chinese student in Glasgow, who had just done a medical degree, wanted to send all of his medical books to a colleague in China.
Yeah.
It was going to cost him a fortune to post them. You know, so what I tried to find was a local club locally to where his friend was, so that we could send them from one Rotary group to another.
Okay.
In that particular method. So we're utilising the network. And because we can do that, then this is going to sound bad, but it's not meant to be. But another example is I sent water filters out last year to the Philippines, and to one of the Rotarians out there to go into individual houses. And he said, send them to Dr. So-and-so in this hospital. He has a charity. Send it for his attention. And that way it was imported without them having to pay import duty. So that's what we try and do. We try and not evade certain taxes and things like that, but, you know, try and minimize the cost either to the sender and or to the recipient, because that money then can be spent on sending more.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know if I answered your question. I'm trying my best. Did I? See, I told you I got off at a tangent.
No, well, I appreciate it, but I mean, I think I'm kind of just sitting in shock, because it's not shock, that's maybe too strong a word. I'm sitting in surprise, I suppose is a better word, if I want to label this more accurately, because I've been aware of the Rotary Club. It's kind of been floating around, you know, but I've never really taken the time to understand or appreciate what the Rotary Club is all about. And, you know, just really understanding the depths of, you know, what you're saying, of service before self is quite fascinating. And obviously the involvement that you have had with the polio network against COVID-19, you know, that's taken me by surprise, because I don't think I appreciated the depth of the connections and the relationships and the networks that you've got. And it's something that I've been learning a lot as you've been showing up throughout the future series and taking part in other panels and conversations, that I've just been weaving together little parts of what you've been saying to really understand more about it, which is why we're having this conversation today. So all your tangents have been interesting, Jimmy, and I'm just curious if there's any other questions that we've got coming in from the floor.
if I can add in while folk are thinking, there are 5 universities in the globe. There's one in England, there's one in Scandinavia, there's 2 in America, and there's one in Australia. And there's a college that does a partial, let's just say a partial degree, but it's not a degree. It's like when you're doing the Open University, you've got to do certain segments that build up the credits. So there's one of these in Thailand, and it's for a Rotary Peace Scholar. So if you're involved in any peace activities and you've got an ordinary degree and you want to do a master's in peace studies, there's very, very limited spaces on there. So it's quite a stringent application, and you've got an interview process. But I think there's, let's just say, 20 places in each of the universities. So there's 500 places going a begging. No, start again, 5 times 20 is 100 places going a begging every year, for you to do a master's. But I'm aware that 99% of those students who get a Peace Scholar, a master's, end up in an NGO somewhere in the world. One, in fact, ended up as Barack Obama's advisor, and he was a former Peace Scholar, which was great, when you realise that Rotary funds that.
Yeah. Wow. Are there any other questions coming in at all?
So you said basically right at the start of the conversation about speaking with communities before a disaster happens, but do you do like long-term, because that's about like it's community resilience is what I picked up from that basically.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I'll relate everything back to what I know somehow. But so do you create long-term resilience plans? Because sometimes a community is more beneficial to have a sort of long-term thing in place instead of just these short, like reactive plans being like, we're going to react to this event. Is it proactive rather than reactive, or is most of it reactive?
In most cases, Stuart, in the past, I think Rotary are reacting to what's happened in the past. But I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, many of the action groups, the Rotary action groups, have taken your stand and have said, no, I'm young, and I'm being serious when I say I'm young in Rotary. I'm 71. The average age of Rotary in the UK is 74. So we're desperately needing young blood, young activists, to take up the mantle and realise the opportunities that are there. You can design a product and you've got a minimum of 1.2 million Rotarians as a potential market. And they can actually use that. They will pay to get these products. For instance, I mentioned the shelter box, £595 each they are. So we'll do a fundraising effort to raise £595. If we raise 1,200, that's 2 shelter boxes. So we raise that money, we send it down to the shelter box and say, right, we're sponsoring 2 boxes. They give you the code number, and you know that it's been sent to Libya, to a camp there, or it's been sent to Haiti, because you can track it and see where it's going. But that was okay. We were seeing what was happening after the effect. And I'm only speaking now for the Disaster Network Assistance flag, because I'm one of the directors on there. But what we do is we look at being prepared. As I said, there are certain things that happen annually, the monsoon period. There are certain things happen regularly, a volcanic eruption or an earthquake. And these you can actually be prepared for. It might only happen once every 2 or 3 years, but if you've got a preparation plan, at least it's there, you know what's going to happen. And you've got an infrastructure and a network in place. But if there's a network of people like Rotary, and as I said, there are other organisations out there, then we can say, being involved with us gives you access to our preparation manuals. We will do online courses. to help you prepare for that. We will send you the materials. And yes, it might be sitting gathering dust, but if you've got an active Rotarian group in your country or in your community, then they will constantly look at that and refresh it and keep themselves aware. Because in my case, I'm not going to be a first responder. I would be a hindrance rather than a help. Whereas you guys are young, they would take you through the year's training to be a first responder. And I mean, they really put you through quite a tough program. You've got to be able to survive in a difficult circumstance where there's collapsed buildings, where you're looking for bodies, but you're also trying to provide shelter for those that have been displaced. You're trying to provide food. You're trying to provide water. You're trying to provide medication. And as a first responder, it's your job to phone back and say, this is what I need, and I need it yesterday. So the opportunities are there for you. But in saying that, when you asked Stuart, is it just local, long day, short term? No, everything has to be long term. But there are some that are predictable. There are others that you cannot predict. The fires that are happening more and more regularly in Australia and in America, where they've got these forest fires that are just destroying whole communities. They don't have the workforce. And it's really, it creates its own, if there's a fire, it creates its own environment. Its own wind comes in. It just alters everything. I don't know if you remember, it might have been before you guys were born, but the French set off a nuclear bomb in the Aurora Atoll, a wee Pacific island, somewhere north of New Zealand. 3 months later, the volcano in New Zealand erupted. 6 months later, Scotland got hit with a freezing zone that normally went across Siberia. But it came down through Scotland, minus 20 degrees. Now, I'm looking at the butterfly effect and saying, if they had set that off, it's like, and you'll need to forgive me because it's going to sound rude, it's like passing wind in the bath. The bubbles have got to come up somewhere. So if they set off a bomb, and deep underground, it's sending out these ripples, and they're going to go, right, where's the nearest place to get a release? Oh, there's a volcano in New Zealand. And up it comes. And of course, the hot air comes out, bashes against the cold air that's up there. And of course, the cold air gets punched out the road. It bashes against another hot current, and you've got all the winds going in a completely different direction. And rather than a big cold current going down through Siberia, it hit Scotland. 9 months later, I'm thinking, oh my, that must have been an influence. You've got to try and predict. There are people out there look at all of these. They do all of these studies all of the time. And, they can do prediction graphs. There was a movie on, because of COP26, I'm sure it was on the telly, because of that, The Day After Tomorrow, where you had I can't remember the fella, but his son got trapped in New York, and he says, I'll come and get you. His father was a climatologist. And that was immediately saw the movie. I thought, that's on because of COP26. But there was a wee guy in north of Scotland alerted them to the fact that the boys in the North Atlantic were all ringing, that the temperature had dropped. These things are out there. They happen. We've got the infrastructure. We just don't communicate enough. And we're too old to take them forward. Help!
Sorry, I'll just jump in here. I just want to thank you for talking about climate risk, because it's something that I've personally experienced. I used to live on Reunion Islands in the Indian Ocean. So we used to deal with cyclones where you used to get stuck inside for weeks, a week at a time. You used to have to fill up the bathtub with water in case the water supply got cut off. And it was, and we even felt the repercussions of the Boxing Day 2004 tsunami that hit Indonesia. We also had a mini tsunami.
But I had the privilege of living in an island that is owned technically by the French government, was run by the French government. So we already had a lot of help from the French government. There was already a lot of prep with regards to all of these climate risks, including volcanoes that explode every so often. But I guess my question is, how much help do you get from governments? Because I know you were talking about local communities and how it's usually local Rotarians that help with the packages and the prep for all of these climate events. But do you get any help from governments themselves, whether they're local, regional, or national?
Well, strangely enough, yes, but it's not the way you would think. You generally find that, well, for instance, many people don't know that the Lord Provost in Glasgow is an honorary member of our Rotary. And of course, that gives us a chance to say, excuse me, sir, but we'd like to do such and such. And we access his network that way. And sometimes we don't even need to ask, he will offer. And equally so down south, there's a lot of politicians and members of Rotary clubs down south. And people use that network and they say, look, the government are actually cutting their international aid by 0.3. Is there any way you could push them to only cut it by 0.1 million? Something like that. Because that's what's going to give the charity the plumpy nuts, to feed the kids, or give, the transport that will help. So governments put tons of money in. And of course, when you've got the likes of the WHO, the World Health Organization, the CDC, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, here's an example. If I raise £500 for end polio, Bill and Melinda Gates will give me £2 for every pound I raise. So that 500 becomes 1,500, which is a phenomenal thing. It means then that what I was hoping, to give has been tripled. If I do it through Rotary, if I give it, then my district will match it, or our Rotary in the UK, Rotary in Great Britain and Ireland will match it, or Rotary International will match it. One of these three will match it. So they will, if I put in 500, it gets doubled to 1,000. And then Bill and Melinda Gates will take that 1,000 and add it, to that. So rather than it be 1,500, it's multiplied by 6 times and it becomes 3,000. Mm. So these networks allow that, to happen. And not that long ago, Boris and the UK government gave 10 million to the end polio. Now, the fact that they've given 10 million, guess what? Bill and Melinda Gates gave 2 for everyone. Now, that is phenomenal. When you've got powerful allies like that. And the governments around the world know it because the Rotarians tell them. And I keep on saying Rotarians, but that's because I'm a Rotarian, but there are many other organisations do the exact same thing. I'm just privileged to have the opportunity to share with you just now.
No, thank you very much, Jimmy. I mean, this has been a really enlightening conversation. So I'm really grateful for you to take the time to speak to us so that we can all learn more about the Rotary and understand how you are helping communities around the world and the different ways in which this is working. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. As I said, I've had the privilege of sharing, so thank you for that. Please ask many questions. If I send you the link, you say it's going to be recorded and circulated. Mm-hmm. If I send you the link to the wee video for the COVID-19 polio collaboration, mm-hmm. it's pretty neat.
Yeah, no, I will do.
I'll also send you all the email addresses for the DNA rag. By the way, being involved in Rotary cost me less than 50 pence. Let me see, 50 pence a day. £1 a week. No, it's more than £1 a week. £3 a week. £3 a week. I pay 140 a year to be involved in Rotary. If you're a Rotary actor, which is 18 to 30-ish, 31, 32, 33, costs you diddly squat. I think it's £1 or £15 in total a year. So you can be a Rotary actor until you're 30-ish before you join Rotary. But it means then that you can get involved. And the great thing about Rotary actors, Rotary are promoting Rotary actors and asking them to get involved in local and national committees. So you can rise up very, very quickly through Rotary to the higher echelons. If you want to break that down nice and quickly, you've got our club, which is in Glasgow. There's 11 clubs in Glasgow, in the greater Glasgow area. For the rest of Scotland, from Fort William down to Stranraer, there's like 45 clubs. There are 2 e-clubs where people meet online, so they don't need to go along to any place. They actually do all of their conversations online. But they meet up maybe once a quarter to get involved in a project or an activity. There's the 35,000 districts, 500 districts, there's 35,000 clubs around the world. There's 1.2 million Rotarians. But if you can imagine, every one of these Rotarians has a network of somewhere between 5 and 10 people. And that's giving you, access to between 6 and 12 million individuals.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a product or a service that addresses basic education or the environment or water and sanitation or maternal and child health or disease treatment and prevention or economic community development, likes of buying 20 sewing machines and putting it into a community in India so that the ladies can all make clothes and sell them and set themselves up as a small cooperative, or peace building and conflict prevention. If you can come up with a program or a service or a product, you've got a minimum market of 1.2 million Rotarians that might buy into it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, thank you very much for reiterating that point, Jimmy. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
I'm sorry I wasn't, smiling